Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Let's Play Morrowind, and currently we're in the library. Finished sorting a lot of books, as you can see. A lot of the new ones have gone to new shelves, like this, which is definitely now the magic shelf, for it includes the Spectrum Study, Mysticism, Blasphemous Revenants, the Art of War Magic, and Legions of the Dead. And I've created two new shelves, so to speak. This one is everything to do with factions. This including the first book, The Brothers of Darkness, which is about the Dark Brotherhood. And this shelf, which is just stuff to do with the world in general. Vampires of Vardenfell, for example. Mysterious Akavir, the true nature of orcs, the wild elves, the changed ones, and so on and so on. I believe I've sorted all of my books now. I think. Yep. Plenty of new additions to the religion shelf, which is already getting quite full. But yeah. And of course all the Dwemer stuff goes on there. Good afternoon. Good morning, rather. Actually, it is morning. Now, we're going to be heading back to Master Arian to report our success very soon. And in the process of remembering to do that, that's an odd way of putting it, but bear with me. I remember to check our requirements to get to the next rank of in-house Telvanni, which is Wizard. We need 1 skill at 60 and 2 skills at 20 out of their favourite skills. Currently, we don't have any magic skills at 60. Our highest magic skill is currently Mysticism at 46. Just double-checking I'm right there. Oh, no, actually, it's Alteration at 51. Is that one of their favourite skills, Alteration? Yeah, it is. So, really what I need to do is... Well, Fathers is going to have to fork over a lot of cash for training, basically, to get this done in a timely fashion. That's the idea anyway. So, yeah. We're going to be visiting trainers. Now, in order to be able to afford this, now I have got 24,000 gold. However, training is very, very expensive in this game, especially with the mods I've got. So we're going to need to go... to be honest with you, a lot of this video is probably going to be me visiting traders and selling stuff. Oh, I forgot to dump my robe here. I'm still too afraid to put things in the closet for fear that the cell will reset and they'll disappear. So the clothes are going on top of the closet instead. I know that doesn't make an awful lot of sense, but there it is. So... yeah, we've got plenty of things to sell, lots of valuable alchemy ingredients I can't do anything with at present. I made some potions. I made a ton more Restore Health, and I even managed to make a Restore Magicka potion with some of those Daedra Hearts I had. But then I remembered how difficult it is to actually get your hands on Restore Magicka ingredients. Comberries do the trick, and Daedra Hearts do the trick, and Frost Salts, I think, as well. The Comberries are definitely the easiest to come by. I do still have the Cursed page. The Cursed Clanfear page. Somewhere in here. At least I think I do. Maybe I don't. Interesting. Maybe I put it somewhere. I don't remember doing it. Anyway, it's around here somewhere. So that's a source of Daedra Hearts, potentially, if I need them. But yeah, making Restore Magicka potions with alchemy in this game is difficult, actually. Surprisingly difficult. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to go sell a bunch of stuff and see some trainers, because I want to get promoted. Right, so, while Fathers is busy visiting every shop in Vivec and beyond, it might be a good time to talk about what his ultimate goals are, since I don't think it's ever been clearly stated before. His plans are often changing, of course, according to circumstance, but for a while now, his current scheme has been coming along rather well. In the broadest sense, Fathis naturally wants his revenge against the Empire that stole a lifetime from him. But in order to even put so much as a dent in an entity as vast as the Tamrielic Empire, or even a dynasty as well established as the Septims, he's going to require a lot of power in both an official as well as unofficial capacity. He's already the somewhat absentee guildmaster of the Morag Tong, but the Morag Tong has rules and a code. As much as he would wish it to be the case, they are not his own personal army of assassins. It's a useful position to be in, since he can intercept every writ that comes the guild's way and keep a close eye on the house wars that continue to be waged in the shadows across Morrowind, but being in that position does not make him directly powerful. Currently, Fathis plans to become the new leader of Great House Telvanni, or at the very least, its leader on Vvardenfell. He intends to do this by rising to the rank of Councillor with the help of individuals like Master Arian and Master Mithras, as well as Baladas Demnivani, his friend and fellow Dwemer enthusiast who lives in Gnesis. Once he is a councillor, Fathis intends to make a bid for the leadership of the house and the rank of Archmagister. This, he suspects, will entail either bribing or assassinating any of the other councillors that do not back his ascension, as well as dealing with Archmagister Gothran himself, of course. There is also the matter of Rilvin Dral in Telvannis, who may or may not need to be eliminated as well. It depends entirely on whether he offers any resistance to the palace coup that Fathis intends to carry out. He's banking a lot on the fact that the Telvanni, unlike the other great houses, generally don't tend to care much about politics, so long as they are left to their own devices. They also respect strength. If Fathis can kill Gothran and assume his position, there will likely be very little argument from below, at least until a new challenger starts feeling ambitious, of course. Fathis imagines that once he's become leader of Great House Telvanni, he'll be in a position to reorganize things somewhat and marshal the organization into a force to be reckoned with, perhaps even seeking the support of some of the other great houses. The Hlalu and their imperial supporting ways will certainly need to be dealt with, not only because of their support of the Septims, but also because they are the wealthiest and largest house at present. Luckily, Radaran, Drez, and Indoril all loathe the Hlalu almost as much as Fathis does. The end goal of this is to make House Telvanni such a powerful faction in Morrowind that it becomes almost impossible to ignore, at which point Fathis intends, in the capacity of Archmagister of a powerful house in its ascendancy, to approach the King of Morrowind, Hlalu Helseth, and insist on being appointed to the newly created position of Royal Battle Mage, modelled on the Empire's position of Imperial Battle Mage, naturally. Once in such a position, it will be a relatively simple matter to usurp power, possibly through magical means, as an old acquaintance of Fathis's once did. Yes, I'm talking about Jaeger Tharn, and yes, Tharn was actually well acquainted with Fathis in the days before he was imprisoned, and before Tharn briefly took over the Empire. As I'm sure you can imagine, when Fathis was finally freed and he learned what had become of his old colleague, he was both greatly amused and just a little bit inspired. Anyway, with the King of Morrowind under his thumb, there is only one potential obstacle that will stand in his way: the Tribunal, the three living gods of Morrowind. Now, of course, dark rumours and some of the more secret texts Fathis has uncovered have suggested that the Tribunal are waning in power for some unknown reason and have become more and more secluded from the general public over the centuries. Fathis absolutely intends to find out exactly why this is eventually, but even in a potentially weakened state, he's reluctant to pick a fight with three living gods. It is his hope that they will simply continue to ignore the goings-on of the outside world and remain in seclusion as his plans come to fruition. Finding a way to destroy them would be a last resort. For a brief moment, Fathis entertains the notion of discovering exactly how they became gods in the first place, and following in their footsteps, before shaking his head and snapping back to reality. He's definitely getting ahead of himself there. Now, You will have probably already noted by this point that the question of the Nerevarine has not factored into any of this. Now, obviously, you almost certainly already know that the Nerevarine prophecy is going to play an incredibly important part in events to come, but at the moment, to Fathis, it's mostly just a curiosity. So far, it has served to explain exactly why he was set free from the Imperial dungeons in the first place, but beyond that, it's a mystery. For the moment, Fathis is convinced, after weeks of reading and researching to no avail, that it's all just superstition. He isn't the reincarnation of Indoril Nerevar. That's preposterous. If he was, he'd surely have begun to remember some details of his previous life by now. No. A reincarnated hero he is not, and unless Emperor Uriel has truly lost his marbles, Fathis doesn't think the Imperials believe it either. What they do believe is that Fathis fits some of the conditions of the ancient prophecy, and this is the reason he was released into the custody of the Blades. The Empire, he thinks, is clearly planning to try and use him as a puppet figurehead, claiming to be a reincarnation of an ancient local hero in order to pacify Morrowind's unruly inhabitants. Fathis has no intention whatsoever of ever letting this happen, but for now at least, he supposes he'd better humour the Blades and continue investigating the Nerevarine cult anyway. Rather importantly, however, the Blades are also investigating the Sixth House cult, and in fact seem to be the only organisation in Morrowind actually bothering to try and do something about it. In all Fathis's plans and schemes, the Sixth House, the Blight, and the mythical devil Dagoth are an unknown element that concerns him. Fathis doesn't like unknown elements. What is certain, though, is that he has absolutely no plans to go marching up Red Mountain to confront the Lord of Hell himself, like his foolish erstwhile apprentice once intended to do. As Fathis haggles with the umpteenth merchant of the day over the price of raw glass, he desperately wishes he had a household of servants he could trust to go out and do this kind of thing for him. If he's going to afford the advanced tuition he requires, it's going to cost a lot of gold, and that means dealing with a lot of merchants. He just hopes not all of them are as cutthroat as some of these street vendors are. One other item on his to-do list is to get his armor and equipment repaired by a professional. And remembering that up on the plaza there are a pair of blacksmiths, he starts heading that way. He's decided to keep most of the magical weapons, like his new Dwemer spear that he found, but he has one or two items he might trade in return for repairs. And while he's up there, he can visit the Mages Guild for teleportation too. Once he's done here, he's decided Balmora will be his next stop, as it has a large selection of merchants that are significantly more well-endowed with coin than a lot of Vivek's merchants are. The Holy City, it must be said, is remarkably lacking in the mercantile department, perhaps due to the lack of pilgrims recently. Now, with all this discussion of Imperial battle mages and the like, it's worth mentioning, actually, that Fathis did, while he was resting at his hideout, get the chance to read through Zirin Arctus's The Art of War Magic that Master Arian gave him. And I figured, while we're still waiting for him to finish doing his shopping, that I might read you an excerpt from it. In this case, specifically, Chapter 3, Dispositions. Yes. So, here we go. Master Arctus said, 1. The moment to prepare your offense is the moment the enemy becomes vulnerable to attack. And the learned Leros Chael comments below this, knowledge of the enemy mage's mind is of the foremost importance. Once you know his mind, you will know his weaknesses. And said Ma also comments, Master Arctus advised Tiber Septim before the Battle of Five Bridges not to commit his reserves until the enemy was victorious. Tiber Septim said, if the enemy is already victorious, what use committing the reserve? To which Master Arctus replied, "Only in victory will the enemy be vulnerable to a defeat." Tiber Septim went on to rout an enemy army twice the size of his. Point number 2. The enemy's vulnerability may be his strongest point. Your weakness may enable you to strike the decisive blow. Now, Marandro comments here that in the wars between the Nords and the Chimera, the Nord shamans invariably used their mastery of the winds to call down storms before battle to confuse and dismay the Chimera warriors. One day, a clever Chimera sorcerer conjured up an ice demon and commanded him to hide in the rocks near the rear of the Chimera army. When the Nords called down the storms, as usual, the Chimera warriors began to waver, but the ice demon rose up as the storm struck, and the Chimera turned in fear from what they believed was a Nord demon and charged into the enemy line, less afraid of the storm than of the demon. The Nords, expecting the Chimera to flee as usual, were caught off guard when the Chimera attacked out of the midst of the storm. The Chimera were victorious that day. Point number 3. When planning a campaign, take account of both the arcane and the mundane. The skillful battle mage ensures that they are in balance. A weight lifted by one hand is heavier than 2 weights lifted by both hands. Point number 4. When the arcane and mundane are in balance, the army will move effortlessly, like a swinging door on well-oiled hinges. When they are out of balance, the army will be like a 3-legged dog, with one leg always dragging in the dust. Point number 5. Thus, when the army strikes a blow, it will be like a thunderclap out of a cloudless sky. The best victories are those unforeseen by the enemy, but obvious to everyone afterwards. Point number 6. The skillful battle mage ensures that the enemy is already defeated before the battle begins. A close-fought battle is to be avoided. The fortunes of war may turn aside the most powerful sorcery, and courage may undo the best-laid plans. Instead, win your victory ahead of time. When the enemy knows he is defeated before the battle begins, you may not need to fight. Point number 7. Victory in battle is only the least kind of victory. Victory without battle is the acme of skill. Point number 8. Conserving your power is another key to victory. Putting forth your strength to win a battle is no demonstration of skill. This is what we call tactics, the least form of the art of war magic. Thulidin Diatharkun comments here that by tactics, Master Arctus includes all the common battle magics. These are only the first steps in an understanding of war magic. Any hedge mage can burn up his enemies with fire. Destroying the enemy is the last resort of the skillful battle mage. Point number 9. The battle is only a leaf on the tree. If a leaf falls, does the tree die? But when a branch is lopped off, the tree is weakened. When the trunk is girdled, the tree is doomed. Point number 10. If you plan your dispositions well, your victories will seem easy and you will win no acclaim. If you plan your dispositions poorly, your victories will seem difficult and your fame will be widespread. Marandro Sul finally comments here. Those commonly believed to be the greatest practitioners of war magic are almost always those with the least skill. The true masters are not known to the multitude. I'm sure that's a great comfort to Fathis, who is himself not particularly well known to the multitude. Of course, I don't think he's going to be planning to lead any armies just yet, but nevertheless, it's all pretty useful information, and some of these tactics here probably apply to more than just battles. Fathis enters a clothier during his trip to Balmora. There isn't anything left in his packs that he can sell here, but nevertheless, he's struck by a sudden fancy for a new robe. He is fond of his current one, with its pouches and pockets aplenty, but its chief purpose is for adventuring in the wilderness. What he would like is something more refined, for the discerning battle mage about the town. Unfortunately, the shop in question didn't have anything that quite fit the bill. He has more luck later on at an establishment owned by one Millie Hastian, who describes herself as a fine clothier. The selection here is slightly more limited, but of a much higher quality. He eyes a few examples, including a ridiculously flamboyant yellow and orange garment, before settling on a significantly less ostentatious choice. It's a tight-fitting robe of burnt sienna and olive green, with white gold trim and decorated with round, polished stones of amber. It's not so obscenely baroque as to draw unwanted attention, but it's also not so rough-looking as to make well-to-do shopkeepers feel slightly alarmed when he crosses the threshold. After all, if he's going to be a Talvani councillor one day, he ought to start dressing like one. Admittedly, it's not perfect. Red is definitely his colour, he's decided, but it will certainly do for now. When it comes to outfits of a more practical nature, there is one that Fathers desires above all others. A complete suit of glass armour. Now, it's worth pointing out that the glass Fathers is thinking of here is not the kind of glass that your windows are made of at home. The stuff he's interested in is made using a combination of rare metals and volcanic glass created by Morrowind's Red Mountain. There are two minerals the Great Volcano is responsible for, which are frequently fashioned into armour and weapons: glass and ebony. Ebony is jet black and incredibly heavy. It's more durable than glass, and while a full suit of ebony armour is a kingly possession indeed, it's simply too heavy for Fathers' old frame to accommodate. Glass, on the other hand, is extremely lightweight and flexible, far stronger than steel, and therefore ideally suited to his purposes. Unfortunately, while the raw glass itself is not difficult to acquire, the armour is. Fathers has heard that there is a smith in the city of Almalexia that is known to forge suits of glass armour, and he has decided he may well have to pay the man a visit one day, when he can afford it.
Is there something you need?
By the time he has finally finished selling off every last item in his packs that he does not require for his own purposes, Fathers has accumulated in total around 31,000 gold. This should hopefully prove just enough to pay for the training he's looking for. He heads straight to the Mages Guild and is introduced to a Dunmer mage by the name of Morrowind Dren, who offers to provide him with tuition for the right price. After Dren is finished getting all of the appropriate books out on the tables, he offers Fathers a cup of canis root tea. The aged assassin declines, preferring instead to idly puff on his hackle pipe as the instructor begins by asking the prospective student a number of questions. Unfortunately, it becomes readily apparent over the next few minutes that there is nothing Morrowind Dren can actually teach Fathers on the subject of alteration magic that he doesn't already know. Dren seems somewhat embarrassed by this, but he tries to hide it as best as possible and somewhat sheepishly provides a list of colleagues that might be able to help. With an arched eyebrow, Fathers extinguishes his pipe and takes the list, eyeing it critically, before thanking the man for his time and heading on his way.
What was that?
Tragically, this process is repeated a number of times as Fathers makes his way to Aldrune and Vivek, seeking out the various scholars on the list that Dren provided, including some skilled in the art of mysticism, in addition to alteration. Each time, Fathers, patient as a mountain, answers basic questions before being referred to yet another mage.
Speak truly, friend.
Eventually, he ends up at Wolverine Hall in Sadrith Mora, where not even the prankster Uleni Hilaran, responsible for the gateway haunting, can help him, though they do spend a few minutes reminiscing about that particularly amusing disturbance before parting ways. Just as he is beginning to lose all hope, the mention of the Gateway Inn sparks a memory. When he was there last, he encountered an Altmer woman named Ardarame, who was no less than a member of the Sijic Order. She had previously tasked him with delivering a message to a mad old wizard who was previously one of the Sijics himself, who was lurking in the ancient stronghold of Indoranion. Fathers completed this job with a little difficulty, and Ardarame was incredibly grateful to him for having done it. If she's still staying at the Gateway Inn, Fathers can think of no one more qualified to teach him. It's a slim hope, but he goes to check anyway. He heads to the gateway and asks the innkeeper if Ardarame is still around. As luck would have it, the wandering Psijic is still renting the room in the west wing of the inn. Fathis can only imagine what other business is keeping her here, but decides it's none of his concern and is simply grateful that fate has chosen to smile upon him.
Yes, Dunmer?
The assassin and the Psijic are reunited, and after pleasantries are exchanged, Ardarame agrees to share with Fathis some of her knowledge of both the schools of alteration and mysticism, though not for free, naturally. Fathis hands over the huge bag of gold he has accumulated, and the Psijic's eyebrows raise by just a barely noticeable fraction before her lips curl into a smile. This will certainly do. They begin immediately, with Ardarame asking a few pertinent questions before launching into an extended tutorial on the finer points of the alteration school, including common misconceptions from an academic perspective, as well as practical techniques. Rather tellingly, she requires no magical tomes whatsoever to illustrate any of this. Throughout the lecture, Fathis makes a few sparing scribbles in a notebook that he produces from his breast pocket, its cover bound with cliff racer hide, a small victory over the hordes of winged vermin that he keeps close to his heart. Literally. This continues for a couple of days, with Fathis puffing on his pipe, writing notes and listening with a kind of furious intent, determined not to waste this incredible opportunity. During a break in his study, he takes a moment to ask his tutor more about the Psijic order from which she hails. Ardarame is guarded in her descriptions, but does give away some basic information. The Psijic order is based on the island of Artaeum, originally located in the Somerset archipelago. Originally, meaning it is not always there. Sometimes it disappears for years, even centuries at a time. As to where it goes when this happens, Ardarame refuses to comment. The Order has produced a number of incredibly famous and talented mages over the millennia, including Manimarco, the King of Worms, Vanus Galerion, the founder of the Mages Guild, and Sothasil, who went on to become one of the 3 God Kings of Morrowind. Members of the Psijic Order often travel abroad to offer counsel to the rulers of Tamriel, and when Fathis asks if that's what she's here doing currently, she narrows her eyes, purses her lips, and changes the subject. The Psijics are masters of mysticism in particular, which they refer to as the Old Way. It is this subject that Fathis begins to study on the second day of their time together. He is taught to enter a kind of meditative trance, which proves difficult at first, but eventually starts to come naturally. What follows is difficult to describe, but in this state, Ardarame presents him with a series of magical paradoxes and teaches him to abandon traditional logic systems when dealing with magic, explaining how they are limiting and antithetical to the very practice of magic itself. This is not an easy task to achieve, however it may sound, and only after hours of attempting to get his head around it does Fathis eventually succeed. And by the time he does, he feels mentally drained in a way that he has never experienced before. Indeed, he feels as though he has touched the realms of insanity and stepped back from the brink just in time. When he explains this to Ardarame, she grins and says that now he's finally starting to understand. Fathis nods slowly, scratching his head and puffing on his pipe, mentioning that if it's all right with her, he'd like to go and have a little lie down for a while.